Autumn's New Beginning. A story vignette inspired by his darling friend Touches of Austen, Book 2, written by Leenie Brown and narrated by Christopher, a cloned voice made available by the voice actor through the Elevenlabs library. Author's note: for the September 2023 Saturday Broadsheet, I sat down to write a short vignette set in autumn, and being me, I thought, oh, wouldn't it be fun to connect this to some other story I have written, because revisiting friends is fun? The result, which you are about to hear, made me think, oops, I think I just accidentally started a new book in the series that is going to require writing at some point. Oh, the things I do to myself. You'll have to let me know in the comments if you also think this vignette holds a promise of a longer story. Edith Upton blew out a quiet breath as she took her aunt's arm and prepared to exit Stratsbury Church. You have not seemed yourself at all today, Aunt Mary said. The reason for that, the parson of this parish, was making his way from the sanctuary to the church door. Mr. Clayton had only grown more handsome in the year since she'd seen him. If only she'd been listening more closely to what her aunt had said about all the arrangements that she was making for this trip. But she had not been. She had been too focused on preparing herself to enter society again, a society in which she had not participated since the incident at that house party. Normally you enjoy Sunday services, her aunt continued. I quite missed hearing your voice as we sang. I sang, Edith protested. Not loudly, but she had managed to find enough breath to give it an attempt. She searched the crowd to see if there was a Mrs. Clayton who would claim a place next to her husband. You sang so softly that I would have had to bend my head to hear you. Her aunt patted her arm reassuringly. All will be well, my dear, all will be well. If only Edith could believe that, then perhaps the past year would have been far less painful. Grandmother's passing would have still been difficult, of course, but the rest might not have been. It is a pleasure to see you again, Mr. Clayton, Aunt Mary said, as they reached the door to the church where the man was standing. I am not sure if you remember me or not, but we met last year at a house party. Of all the things for her aunt to say, how were all things to be well if her aunt brought up the very thing which Edith did not want anyone to remember? You left early, she glanced at Edith, as did we. Yes, I do remember you. It was at the Abernethys, was it not? It was indeed, and was it not quite the eventful party? Edith dared to look up from her study of the ground in front of her to see how Mr. Clayton received such a comment. His reason for leaving that party had not been any better than hers, for he had been played for a fool by the lady he loved, while she had only been made a spectacle of by her brother, and had had her chances of making a good match ruined once again. Mr. Clayton drew a noticeable breath. That is one way to say it. He offered her a small smile. Did your grandmother recover? Edith shook her head. I'm sorry to hear that, he said. A gentleman who looked very much like Mr. Clayton approached him from behind as he spoke. Is the rest of your family well? Mr. Clayton asked, ignoring the fellow behind him. They are. What brings you to our part of the world? That would be my doing, Aunt Mary answered. My dear friend Mrs. Dunning has a son who knew of a place that was going to be available to lease for a few months, and since we have but a few months before we must prepare for another season, I decided it would be lovely to escape to the country. Ah, so it is you who has moved into the Turpins' cottage. The man behind Mr. Clayton entered the conversation. That would be correct, Aunt Mary answered. This is my brother, Mr. Graham Clayton, Mr. Clayton said by way of introduction. Graham, this is Miss Upton and her Aunt Miss Hindle. We met at the Abernethys last year. Mr. Graham Clayton's head tipped. Upton? One eyebrow cocked. My brother and Mr. Shelton are particular friends, Mr. Clayton said softly. Edith's eyes grew wide as heat raced across her cheeks. My brother acted rashly, she said. I am certain you have heard about the incident. There was no point in hiding what had happened if this Mr. Clayton was friends with the gentleman her brother had accosted and accused of. She could not, would not, even think it. Such travesties should not be replayed too many times, and she had surpassed too many times many months ago. A smile crept across Mr. Graham Clayton's face. I do suppose that is an incident one might wish to forget. If ever there was, Edith agreed, then not a word shall be spoken of it. He looked around. My wife is just there. He pointed to a group of ladies, and Edith supposed the youngest in the group was likely his wife, since the rest looked old enough to be his mother. My mother is standing next to her, he continued. Father is somewhere, but not in our viewing. Do not be shy about calling on us at Stratsbury Park during your stay. He winked. Unless your brother joins you, then I would like some warning before you arrive. Aunt Mary chuckled, while Edith felt her cheeks grow decidedly hot. She must look like a well-ripened strawberry by now. Mr. Graham Clayton touched his brother's sleeve. Mother expects you to join us. You may tell her that I have not forgotten. He turned back to Edith and her aunt as his brother left. I am certain that you will adore Bea. She is Graham's wife and a long-time friend. She is quite the book lover, and as I remember it, you were never without a book nearby when at the Abernethys. Edith blinked. You noticed that? He nodded. It set you apart from your friends, since they did not seem to be the sort who would admit to enjoying the activity. On that you are not wrong. I suppose it should have been my first clue that I was looking at things from the wrong angle, so to speak. His brow furrowed. They did not prove to be true friends, Aunt Mary said in answer to his perplexed look. I do know something about that. Mr. Clayton motioned for them to join him in walking down the church steps. I hear Miss Love is married now. He paused and looked up at the tree that spread its leafy arms above them. She is Bea's cousin, he added. Edith gasped. How horrible to be tied so closely to someone like that. Does that mean that you have had to hear about her regularly? Not regularly, but on occasion. She is quite happily settled after a bit of trouble. Indeed, Aunt Mary said with interest. It is not my story to tell, Mr. Clayton cautioned. I would not expect you to tell it, but I admit to being curious. Do you? Edith clamped her lips closed on the question that was whirling in her head and which should have stayed there. Do I what? Mr. Clayton looked at her intently. I am not afraid to field any questions you might have, but you should know that I may not, in good conscience, be able to answer them all. Edith shrugged. Do you still regret her? I know I should not ask it, but with my situation I have not yet been able to fully recover from it, and I dread. The season? He smiled softly, as if he understood her need to know that there was hope for a future untainted by painful memories. Yes, the season. After all, there were the rumours, as well as the former friends who were not willing to be associated with those rumours, about which to worry. I felt the same last year when the season began, but, as you can see, I have survived it. A leaf twirled in front of them as it fell to the ground, and he bent to pick it up. I have learned that some things need to be removed for new growth to eventually begin. He handed the leaf he held to her. I do not regret Miss Love aside from the time I spent being blinded by a pretty face and open disposition. New friends will come, Miss Upton, and when they do you will be ready to wisely choose which to keep and which to leave as mere acquaintances. Have you found that to be true for you? Aunt Mary asked. Is there, or will there soon be, a Mrs. Clayton? He blew out a breath. I'm still waiting on the good Lord to provide, he chuckled. Though he will have to bring her to my doorstep, so to speak, as I do not intend to attend the season this year. There is just so much to do here. He glanced at the carriage that had come to a stop in front of them. I see Graham is waiting for me, and I have yet to divest myself of my robes. He turned toward the church, but then turned back. We did not get to become very well acquainted at the house party, as I was rather distracted with Miss Love. He paused as if uncertain if he should continue. Would it be agreeable to you both if I called on you tomorrow? Not as your parson for the duration of your stay, but as a friend? I think that would be absolutely delightful. Do you not agree, Edith? Indeed I do. He gave a bow of his head. Until tomorrow, then. Well now, Aunt Mary whispered as the man made his way to the church and they began their walk home. That seems promising. Aunt, Edith cautioned. Oh, I know, her aunt replied. There will be no playing of games. You have only admonished me on that nearly 1,000 times in the past month. She pulled Edith closer to her. But you must admit that having anyone who knows your story and is still willing to be friends is hopeful. As Edith agreed with her aunt, she looked at the leaf in her hand. Perhaps this trip was a good thing. Perhaps in the next 2 months she would be able to shed her past in preparation for a new beginning, just like the trees did each autumn. Thank you for listening to Autumn's New Beginning. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please help other readers find it by liking this video and sharing it. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you'll always know when I upload another video. The 2023 copyright for Tales from Pemberley and other sweet story vignettes in which Autumn's New Beginning can be found is held by Leenie Brown. All rights reserved. The narrator for this story has been Christopher, a cloned voice made available by the voice actor through the Elevenlabs library.